for carrying out unnecessary
Well,
operations.
good afternoon, everybody. This is John Hudson and Andy Carpenter from SDRplay, welcoming everybody from the Finnish and Worldwide DX Association, and a great chance to follow up from the session we had in Tampere a couple of weeks back. First of all, a big thank you to everybody who has bought an RSP from us. And the purpose of this session is to really try and help any of you who might be having problems. We're going to have, I'm looking at the live chat. And so as we go along, Andy will be demonstrating some of the capabilities of the, oh, please can you mute the RSP? Okay. Sorry about that, sorry about the noise. We are really pioneering the use of the YouTube webinar technology, so I apologise if we have a few problems, but it does seem quite a capable system. We are in the middle of the countryside here in England, about 60 miles, 100 kilometres north of London, near Bedford, and the internet connection, I thought it was quite good now, but we've had a few problems with the quality, so we just hope it keeps going for the show. So what we were planning to do, we're going to focus on SDRuno because obviously that's the software that we supply, and we will try to show you how to get the RSP. We're going to be using an RSP2 here because a lot more of you bought RSP2s than RSP1s. But most of what we show will be applicable equally to the RSP1. So as we go, please add any questions of any problems you might be having where you need particular help or comments. But we'll start off with Andy giving a quick overview of where to go to on the website, how to get up and running initially with SDRuno. So Andy, over to you.
Hi everybody. So when you first start SDRuno, once you've got the drivers installed from the website, this will be the first window that you see. It's the SDRuno main window, and all of the control on here is for either adding receivers or controlling the RSP hardware. Across the top here we have a series of buttons. I can take you through each of these. So there is the options button, which just shows you things like there's the user manual, which is quite a good resource, and you can change the priority of the application and what modes you want to run, which channels you want to look at. And if you're using IF output mode from a transceiver, for example, this is where you would swap the I and Q channels over, which is required. There's also these buttons up here, SP1, SP2 and RX buttons. And I'll show you what happens when you press these. So for the SP1 window, this is the main input spectrum display. This will display, currently I've got a 2 megahertz spectrum, but I've added decimation of 2, so my total spectrum that I'm looking at is actually 1 megahertz here. And the main window also shows that I'm in 0 IF mode, and I have a gain reduction of 54 dBs. Also up here is the RX button, and when I press that, that will display the RX control window, and that tells me what frequency I'm working at. And in here I can also set what mode of operation, so FM, AM, lower sideband, upper sideband, CW, and within those modes there are sub-modes. So obviously in FM you have narrowband FM, wideband FM, stereo wideband FM, and you can also set the filter bandwidth. So there's in FM, for example, there's 60 kilohertz, 80 kilohertz, 120 kilohertz, and 192 kilohertz. The other window, which I don't actually have captured here, just bear with me one moment, is the SP2 window. And the SP2 window, it shows the demodulated output spectrum. This is where you can, so if I bring this in here, make it slightly smaller. We're sort of struggling for real estate here a little bit, but I guess you don't need to see me and John as much. There we go. So the SP2 window allows you to see the demodulated output spectrum. Once I've set up my mode of operation, for example, in this case we're in FM, wideband FM mode. I'm just going to press play, and I've got the output muted here, so you won't actually hear any sound just yet. But I'm going to press play, and this starts SDRuno, and we're now seeing both the input spectrum, and we're also seeing the output demodulated spectrum.
I've already had the common question about saving workspaces to make sure we mention that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So we'll come on to that in just a few minutes. That is definitely a common question, and it's quite easy that once you've got your workspace set up, it's quite easy to lose it.
Yes. At
the moment, we're going to address that in a future release, but at the moment it's actually quite easy to lose it. So we will come on to that in just a few minutes. I mean, the workspace is actually it's a way of storing all of the window locations on the screen. Each of these windows can be moved around. They can be resized. There are the SP1 and SP2 windows have menus. If you right click on, actually you can't see it on the capture there, but if you right click on the arrows in the bottom right hand corner, there are some fixed sizes that the windows can snap to, or you can just grab the arrow in the corner and you can resize the display. There are a number of windows you can open with SDRuno. We've got the EX control window. In fact, I won't open up all these windows, but there are a number of windows. You've got the RDS output that you can also display as a separate window. It gives you quite a lot of flexibility. Initially, it can be quite confusing with all the different windows, but once you get used to the fact that everything is in its own separate window, you can create some quite nice looking custom layouts. If you have multiple monitors, you can also arrange your several SP1 windows or several SP2 windows on different monitors. So there's quite a lot of flexibility. Actually, I will cover the saving of the workspaces now. Let's do that. So currently, I have this layout. I've got 4 windows in the display, and in the bottom right hand corner of the main window is where the workspaces are stored. If I left click on there, you can see that there's a default workspace and then there are 9 other workspaces. These are all just currently empty. If I was to left click and select any one of these, then it would just default me back to having the main window and nothing else. So now what I'm going to do is I'm
able to see what you're doing there, Andy.
I think that menu isn't being displayed, so that's an artifact of the capture, which is a shame. Yeah, so
we seem to have some limitations with the capture software, not actually displaying.
It's capturing the window, but it's not capturing any menus that pop up from the windows, which is unfortunate.
We're learning this as we go. This may be a limitation of this form of webinar.
I mean, could capture the entire monitor, but I don't know if that we may have to.
I don't know.
Yeah, this is. I don't. Yeah.
So can we, if maybe if we just talk through what happens if you hover your mouse over where it says
so where that says default workspace in the bottom right hand corner, when you left click on those words, left click, a menu will appear which shows the default workspace and 9 other workspaces. So you can save up to 10 different workspaces. And the way that you save these is you give it a name. So if you right click on where it says default workspace, then it goes into this editing mode, and I can change this name to Andy1, and now this is now renamed this workspace to Andy1. And if I left click on this, although you can't see it, the default workspace has now been renamed to Andy1. The way to store this is slightly convoluted, and we are going to address this in probably the next release. Is you hold down the left control button, you then click on the words where the workspace is with the left mouse button. The menu will appear, and then you can select the workspace in which you want to store that in. So I'm going to left click Andy1.
And there is a video in our
so on our YouTube channel,
one of Mike's videos in the video section of the website has I think Ismo will also send a link with the email or with that video in it. So thank you, Ismo.
Yeah. So yeah, Mike's done quite a number of very good videos showing SDRuno in a very wide range of applications, and he does cover workspaces in one of those videos. It's very good.
So to summarize, it is possible to save the workspace. It's a little bit of a complicated process, and in the future we're going to make it much simpler in the next month or so.
Yeah, in one of the next updates, probably the next one, hopefully we're going to change that so it's a lot more intuitive. And we'll also obviously document that properly in the change notes, and we'll do a video as well showing how that's improved.
I'm not sure your first name, sorry. Someone has just said it's page 14 of the SDRuno manual. Actually does mention this, but it's hidden away there, and it's important.
Yeah, the single most important thing is when you're saving the workspace is to hold down that left control button on the keyboard.
Yes.
Because as soon as you let that go,
you lose everything.
You will lose the ability to save.
Yeah.
And instead of saving, you're now selecting.
Yeah.
And so if you select an empty workspace, that's what you'll end up getting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has been a frustration for quite a few customers. And we do recognise that it needs fixing, and we will fix that.
We've had another request. I'm sure it's on your list, but obviously these DXers are always trying to record, so they're hoping we'll cover how to record.
We can do that. So yeah, we can cover that. Yeah, we can cover recording. So in the main window, there is a record panel. So
REC panel.
REC panel. So let me just. Fortunately, this is a slightly painful way of doing this. Is that these aren't all captured instantly, which is rather. There we go. Capture. So here we go. Let me bring this one down here. Move that one up a bit. So this is now the. And I can bring this over here. Okay, so you get the the recording panel. The way this works is that when you press record, it will default to creating a WAV file that is SDRuno specific, because it's not an audio file of the VFO. It is a recording of the entire IQ spectrum that is being, of the bandwidth that you've specified in the main window. And so you can see that if you start to specify large bandwidths, 8 and 10 megahertz of bandwidth, say, when you press record, those files are going to get pretty big pretty quick. So I mean, I'm only viewing 1 megahertz of spectrum here, and so when I press record here, it's now going to start to, I don't know if you can see those values, but you know, we're at 23 megabytes, you know, 30
megabytes. Wow.
it's going up at a rate of about 4 megabytes a second. And so what's happening is it's recording the entire IQ bandwidth. So I can now stop this, which I'll do, and then back in the main control window, I can go into the option menu, and I can select the input, and I can specify a WAV file. And now I'm going to load in the WAV file that we've just created, and I'm going to open that up. And in the recorder window, it will show the file name. This is the one that we've just recorded, and I can put it on a loop. And then if I press play, what will happen is that Uno is now playing back that whole IQ spectrum, and I can analyze the entire spectrum as if it was coming from the live device. Unfortunately, I'm muted here, so if I unmute, I don't know if all these are channels. I can't actually, unfortunately, hear it. But when it gets to the end of the recorded spectrum, then, because I've pressed this button here, to the blue button, to automatically loop it, it will just continuously loop around that whole IQ file.
So this is great for analysing a whole chunk of spectrum on a particular time when conditions are good, to actually see a whole range of DX stations that might be coming through.
Yeah, I think there's quite a common application is to you know, record a whole load of bandwidth overnight.
Yeah.
Say, for example, I know some of the satellite guys do that as well. So rather than sit there and wait for a specific window to open, they can record it, and then they can analyze it again in the morning. So these files will default to your documents folder. That's where they default to. But you can specify, click on File, and you can specify where these files get saved to.
Right, let me just check. Ismo has just commented, with the right click you select the file location.
Yeah, so that's right, yeah.
Okay.
And then once I finish processing the WAV file, I can go back to the options menu, go up to select the input, and I can specify the RSP, and when we press play, we're back on a live RSP stream again.
Ismo's just commented that more typically they do this on medium wave, so
okay,
I guess everything's applicable.
Yeah, the frequency is arbitrary, so you can do this across the spectrum, anywhere from a couple of hundred kilohertz up to the full 10 megahertz of bandwidth. But just bear in mind that obviously the more bandwidth you specify, the quicker your disk is gonna fill. Those files get pretty quick, so they get pretty big pretty quick.
Okay.
Just let's go back to the main window just for a minute. I just want to cover some of these buttons that we've kind of just we haven't really touched on. So the main window is where the RSP control is. The RSP2 has multiple antennas, so you've got the two SMA ports, which are antenna A, antenna B. Antenna B is the one nearest to the high Z port, the green plug connector, and then you have the high Z port. The high Z port is limited to 30 megahertz. I'm currently at 89 megahertz here, so if I try and select the high Z port, it's not going to let me because we're outside of that 30 megahertz window. If I'm muted here, so if I now go down below 30 megahertz, it will now allow me to specify the high Z. I mean, we don't have anything connected to the high Z port in our case. But I can now specify the high Z. If I now try to go above 30 megahertz whilst I'm connected to the high Z port, it will throw me back to the antenna A port. So Uno will not allow you to use the high Z port above 30 megahertz.
Can I just ask one question that's popped through? Just going back to recording. Does the recorder have timers?
No, so you cannot currently specify a time to start the recording. That is something that we've talked about, and scheduled recordings is, I think, something that will come. Yeah. But currently, it's a press record, press stop. It's a real-time thing. Yeah. Yeah, but yes, scheduled recordings is something that we've been asked to provide.
And in fact, it's coming through the top of their wish list.
So yes. So
you're talking to the right person here.
Yeah, we've got a pretty big wish list. So and we're working through them as best we can. Scheduled recordings probably is not going to appear in the next release, but I would have thought it'd have been in the one after that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the functionality list for the next one's finalised, so that we can get it done and get it out there. There's some nice features in there. So let me. I just want to come back to the main window and just finish off on some of the other buttons that are in here. So we've covered the antenna port select. On the antenna B port. Like I said, the one in the middle, there is a 5-volt bias T output on there. That is only selectable. That only functions when the antenna B port is selected. So you can click on it, but nothing will happen until you actually start using the antenna B port.
So that might be applicable if any of you are doing kind of UHF type DXing TV, maybe, where you might have a masthead amplifier or some kind of remote amplifier close to the antenna. Not so appropriate down medium wave and short wave.
Yeah.
You might want to talk about decimation and.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just finish on the other. Whilst you're in the antenna A or antenna B ports, there's also a medium wave FM notch filter. So it's a hardware filter, but it's software selectable. So if I go back up to broadcast, FM broadcast, and then if I click on the medium wave FM notch button, you can see that the broadcast signals are completely knocked out. So if you're having problems with large broadcast signals near where you are, that may be of quite a bit of use to you.
Particularly, yes, it's for shortwave DXing, where you may be getting some kind of strong interference from the local broadcaster. It'll just clean up your spectrum down at the HF frequencies.
Right. So the other couple of things on here is we've got the RF gain slider. I don't think we need to really go into the gain control too much. I don't know whether AGC with the RSP2 there are two distinct gain mechanisms. So we've got an RF gain, which is on a slider on the main panel, and that is as you can see, as I move up and down the slider, I'm applying different amounts of gain to the front end. What's also happening in conjunction with that is we have an IF gain control, and by default the IF gain control is controlled automatically by an AGC loop. It's a gain. Let's see if I can bring this window up. I don't know if we can see this. So I'm just going to have to quickly capture this because this isn't being shown for some reason. So it's a sub menu of a.
Just while we're waiting, yeah, I understand some of you do FMDX, in which case don't use the FM.
Yeah, that's not gonna work well for you. That's okay. That's interesting. That isn't. I'm not able to. For some reason, I'm not able to I'm not able to capture because it's a sub window. But there's a settings panel on the main window, which will allow you to turn the IFAGC on and off. So at the moment it's on. If I switch it off, I have a sort of a I've got a 40 dB window of gain control that I can apply.
So this is like a black window that appears when you click on
settings
click
and
on SCTT at the top left of the main window, and there's a very clear slider.
Yeah. The AGC, so it's enabled by default. If you have large bursty sort of signals nearby your wanted signal, you may need to switch that off.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll see the noise continually
adjusting to optimize to stuff that you don't even care about.
Right.
Which can be a bit distracting.
Yeah. So you can switch that off and then just do a full control, manual gain control.
And that's probably also worth mentioning. Whatever it is you're listening to, it's worth having the bandwidth and decimation combination down to just the amount you need to comfortably do what you want to.
Right. So we can talk about let's talk about decimation. Yeah. So natively the hardware supports a sample rate of between 2 and 10 megahertz, and to get to sample rates and bandwidths lower than 2 megahertz, we can apply decimation. So on the main window, you have a sample rate field, which you can specify, SR, between 2 and 10 megahertz in 1 megahertz steps. And then next to that is the DEC window, which you can specify as a decimation up to 8. I think in future versions we're going to be able to increase that amount of decimation.
And then you multiply the two.
Divide the sample rate by the decimation factor, and that will give you your final sample rate.
The top right hand corner, final SR is and that's of course in hertz.
This is all in hertz, yeah, unfortunately.
Hertz,
yeah. So
we get a lot of comments about that.
I know. So currently I'm at 2 megahertz sample rate. If I change the decimation to 8, now the amount of bandwidth that I'm seeing in the SP1 display is 250 kilohertz. Now that obviously helps me from a number of points of view. If I'm only interested in that amount of spectrum and I want to record it, then that's going to help me from a file size point of view, because I'm only recording 250 kilohertz of spectrum instead of a megahertz or 2 megahertz. And it will also help on the CPU load, because the API that is in SDRuno is very efficient. So rather than viewing 10 megahertz of spectrum and then using SDRuno to zoom in on that spectrum, that's very inefficient compared to in the main window specifying a high decimation factor to lower the final sample rate in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then once I've got 250 kilohertz of bandwidth, I can still use the SDRuno zoom factor to actually go in quite, we've got 30 kilohertz now, 15 kilohertz, and so on. Mm-hmm. When you press record, even though if you're zoomed in, when you press record, it will still record the entire IQ stream depending on the amount of bandwidth that's specified in the main window. So the recorder is main window dependent, not the zoom factor in SDRuno. I don't know if we'll cover virtual receivers.
Yes, I think just
touch on that.
If there are particular things you want answering, obviously just add to the chat. We will continue on things we think are generally of interest. And I think adding, how would you set up a second virtual receiver might be an interesting thing to look at. Okay, so currently,
if I just take you to one. So if you look at the SP1 window, for example, you'll see these digits in the top right-hand corner. These have a dual purpose. The first value 0 in this case. This is the instance of SDRuno. You can have a number of SDRunos running at the same time if you have multiple RSPs connected, for example, and that number will increase when you add more SDRuno instances. The 2 digits to the right of that indicate the virtual receiver that this is associated with. So because we've only got one receiver, which is defaults to 0, all of these values in the top right hand corner of these windows are all 0, 0. If I stop the stream and I add another virtual receiver,
so you click on Add VRX in the main window.
In the main window, yeah. So we now get a second virtual receiver, and it's currently red. So even though we've added them and we can open up these windows, it won't be processed because it's by default is disabled. So we will enable the second receiver, and we can now start to open up multiple windows. So just bear with me for a minute because these are not going to be captured. So I just need to P1, and I need to capture the second one, which is that one. Okay, so now let me move this out of the way. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get. I'll have to make this smaller so we can see what's going on here. Really, what I want to show is that these 2 receivers are now different. So I also need to open up an RX control window for the second receiver, which I'll do also here. And I'll capture. Let me just quickly capture that one. Okay, and we're gonna capture the second one, and let me move that over to here. Okay, so if I now press play. Okay, what we now currently have is we have still one RSP, but now we have two receivers. 2 virtual receivers running on the same spectrum. My machine, you may see my machine is struggling now because it's only a laptop, and we're doing this broadcast, and so the video processing is putting the CPU load up extremely high. It's not actually SDRuno. You can see in the main window that the SDRuno CPU load is actually still quite reasonable. It's just because I'm doing this broadcast and we've got the extra overhead. Yeah, so that's why it may look like it's a slower update. So currently what's happening is we've got both receivers are on 89.1 megahertz. The 2 receivers can independently be changed. The frequency can be changed as long as they sit within the spectrum of the bandwidth that was specified in the main window. So we're currently at 250 kilohertz. Let me put that decimation back to 1. So now we've got 2 megahertz of spectrum. This will be easier to demonstrate. We're now seeing 2 megahertz of spectrum in both of the virtual receivers. So in the second, you can tell that which windows connect to which virtual receiver, because as I explained on the first virtual receiver, that those 2 digits were 0, 0 in the top right hand corner of the window. On the new virtual receiver, it's now 0, 1. So on the SP1 window.
Hard to hear.
Oh, it's because this one isn't muted. There we go. Yes. Yeah, sorry,
yeah,
I hadn't.
We can't tell which audio channels are open, which is going to get real fun now with
we've got virtual
2 of them to keep control of.
Yeah, so apologies for that. Okay, so let me just quickly cover that again. We've got now 2 virtual receivers on the same piece of hardware, same RSP. They both start at the same frequency, so they're both on 89.1 megahertz. you can tell in the top right hand corner of the SP1 window which one is connected to the VRX0, which is the 2 zeros there, and this window here is VRX1. And that is true for any window that opens up.
The stream is struggling, I think.
It's because my machine's buffering. Yeah, we're really going to struggle to show this properly, I think. Yeah. Let's see if I can reduce the load a little bit. Yeah, it's my machine not able to keep up. But basically, what I can show here is that if I click in these windows, you can see that we can, with the one piece of hardware, we can look at multiple VFOs. So I've got, I can demod, and not only that,
it's stopped again. Yeah.
It's just because we're really struggling with the CPU load. Let me just press stop here.
Yeah.
So that will give the machine a chance to catch up a little bit. So what you can see here is that with these two VRXs is that I can process them independently. So in one I can do FM wideband, or in the other one I can do FM narrowband. I can change the filter bandwidths. I can really post-process these two differently.
And in fact, down on shortwave, on HF, you could have, for example, a 17 meter band, or a one of the 12, 13 meter bands simultaneously with the same.
Yeah, if you look at 8 megahertz down or so, yeah. Down at you can probably cover 2 or 3 handbands.
Yeah.
The output of the receiver of the virtual receiver can then be directed to different places. So, for example, for the first virtual receiver, I can output that to speakers and I can listen to it. The second one, I could output that to a virtual audio cable and connect that into another application where I might be doing some digital decoding.
Yeah.
LO frequency and locking it. Okay. So these just briefly explain what these two values are. So the hardware, the RSP is what you do is you set the LO frequency of the RSP, and then you specify the amount of bandwidth around that LO frequency that you want to.
And that's the local oscillator, which kind of is the software equivalent of the traditional mixing signal, which mixes with the desired frequency that you're looking at. And it's the difference between the local oscillator traditionally and the desired frequency, which would actually be your IF frequency if you have an IF, but of course in our case, most cases you have 0 IF, and so sometimes people get confused that the local oscillator ends up being the same as the frequency of interest.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. For those of you who are coming to SDR for the first time, this is sometimes a little bit hard to get your head around. But again, Googling, and there's a lot of wiki information on SDR local oscillators and so on.
Yeah.
There's general reading if you're not sure, but then
I think it's
once you've got that concept, then you've got the practical stuff, which I think you were just about to come on to.
Yeah, within SDR, so the RSP is you only ever set the LO in the RSP and the amount of bandwidth that you're receiving. The VFO, so the signal that you're actually interested in, is a virtual frequency oscillator that is specified within that bandwidth, and then there is a second demodulation. Sorry, is a second demodulation process that then demodulates around the VFO, which then you can obviously hear. So that VFO frequency can be anywhere within that bandwidth. So if your LO is at 100 megahertz and you're looking at 8 megahertz of spectrum, the lowest you can go to is 96 megahertz and the highest you can go to is 104 megahertz. in that scenario. No matter how many VRXs you add, and you can have up to 16 VRXs in one SDRuno instance, all of the VFOs have to sit within that 8 megahertz or however many megahertz of spectrum that you've specified, and they will it always is centered around the LO frequency. So the LO frequency is always the same for all of the VRXs, just that you can specify the different VFO in each of them. So hopefully, if you press, there's an LO lock button here. So the only VRX that can control the LO frequency is the master, which is the VRX0. So VRX0 can, if I change the frequency here, what you see, if you see, so this is the master RX control window, and I'm going down in 1 megahertz steps.
And just like for real newcomers, you may notice he's holding the cursor over the digit he wants to change, and then scrolling the mouse wheel.
I'm scrolling down to go down in frequency.
Change the frequency down.
And I can go up as well by scrolling up on the mouse wheel. So I'm going down in 1 megahertz steps, and what you can see is that this is actually affecting both VRX0 and VRX1, because VRX0 is the master, and it controls everything. If I try to do the same thing on VRX1, what you'll see, what you'll see is now, in fact, it's actually not letting me change the 1 megahertz because I've only got 500 kilohertz viewed, so I need to go lower. So now I can go down. I've got a 500 kilohertz window in which I can go up and down with. I don't know if you can hopefully see that in the RX control window, that it's allowing me to only go to within the LO frequency plus or minus 250 kilohertz.
You're boxed into a slot of spectrum dictated by whatever is set in the main VRX0.
Some people come to us and say, well, my frequency scrolling isn't working. I've got multiple VRXs open. The frequency control's working in the 0, but it's not working in the 1 or the 2. And that's because they don't appreciate that VRX0 can do in VRX0 you can go anywhere, and it will drag the other VRXs along with it. But when you go back to the VRX1 or 2, it is constrained to whatever the VRX0 has specified.
So in a way, you have to have a bit of an idea what it is you want to do with all these extra receivers before you commit your first main window.
Yeah, just bear in mind that VRX0 is where you need to set the hardware and the amount of spectrum that you're viewing. And then, I mean, some people set VRX0 and then they minimize it, and then they just work in VRX1 and 2, and so that they don't have that problem. An alternative way is using the LO lock. So if I enable the LO lock in the main window, what happens now is that now I'm trying to move the VRX0. Believe me, I'm trying to.
He really is trying.
I'm going up and down on the mouse, the middle mouse wheel, and it's not allowing me to change that frequency. It will allow me to change within that 500 kilohertz window. I'm going up and down, but because I've pressed LO lock, it is not allowing me to change the LO frequency.
No, LO frequency.
It's fixed, steady. And so some people use this to stop accidentally allowing VRX0 to change the LO and go off, and then affecting VRX1 and 2 and taking all of the VRXs away from where you wanted them to be.
Would this be a good point to maybe mention when the RSP, both the 1 and 2, has a number of bands, doesn't it, up to 12 megahertz, its own internal filter bands.
There are a number of pre-selection filters,
and
yes.
It's actually the LO choice which determines which
Yes.
side of the fence you're on. Is that?
That's right. So let's see, for example, if you're at
like 12 megahertz.
So if you're around 12 megahertz, so below 12 megahertz you get one filter, and above 12 megahertz you'll get a different filter. And it is the LO frequency that determines which filter you get.
So you might have, say, a 4 meg window,
right,
from 10 to 14 megahertz, but it's whether you're on 11.9 or 12.1 megahertz
determines which pre-selection filter you get.
Which pre-selection filter you get, and you'll see obviously some differences in performance because of that.
Yes. Yeah. So again, that information's on the data sheet, so you can see what
the data sheet shows the bands.
It will show what the bands are. So if you're working within, or if you're working around a band edge, then it's the LO frequency that's important from the filter selection, not what you're trying to demodulate, not your VFO frequency.
Yeah. Right, we've got another question just come in. Again, to do with recording. So you couldn't record 88 to 90 and 92 to 94. Well, I think
you can record the whole lot. You could record because the record function works on the main window, and the main window works on the RSP. So you can record everything from 88 to 94, but you could not record 88 to 90 and then have a gap and then record 92 to 94. So, but you could certainly record 88 all the way up to 94.
Because you're under the 10 megahertz.
Yeah, because you'd be within the. You set the. I mean, in that case, you would set probably. If I set a LO frequency of 91 with a bandwidth of 6, then I would get all of those frequencies. Yeah. And then you could process them separately. Yeah. But 6 megahertz of bandwidth will churn up quite a lot of disk space quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the only way to do simultaneous recordings of separate chunks of frequency would be to have multiple devices. Yeah. And then you could have separate instances of SDRuno, and then you can record them separately then.
Yeah. Ismo's just made the point actually on locking that it's very useful when listening to medium wave, and you could set the LO to something like 1200 kilohertz or somewhere, which 1.2 megs, which is
yeah. The other thing about
to cover the whole of medium wave.
The things to note this, particularly with AM signals, is whether you use 0IF or low IF,
right? Because
we've got the ability in the RSP to use either. If you're using 0IF, there'll be a hole in the spectrum, so you should make sure that the LO and the VFO are slightly offset.
When you're
in 0IF mode. Yeah. If you switch to low IF mode, that doesn't have the same issue.
The DC spike.
That's the DC spike. Yeah, because we have there is an algorithm in the API to do DC offset compensation, and that will remove part of the signal at the LO frequency, or effectively at the LO frequency. Yeah. And so if your carrier is there, you'll have a problem. So down at in AM, if you use 0IF, just make sure your LO is offset from the VFO, or use low IF mode.
Yes, so basically avoid having the LO set to the exact frequency of where you have potentially an interesting DX signal, because you may be attenuating it, or the software may be attenuating it unintentionally, but because it has to remove that DC spike. Again, if you Google DC spike SDR, you can learn all about the issues. The issue that is generic with direct conversion.
So you can argue, well, why not work in low IF all the time? You can. The issue with low IF is that the amount of spectrum you can see at any one time is significantly reduced.
Another question just come up. What would be the handy way to enter the LO frequency?
So when you first start SDRuno, the LO frequency and the VFO frequency are the same. And if rather than using the mouse to scroll up and down the frequency range, if I left click in the receiver control window, then the box turns green and the frequency goes to 0, and now I can enter on a keyboard. I can enter a frequency. So if I want, say, 92.8 megahertz, I do 92. Now I'm not going to press anything other than the number key. So don't press comma or 0. So I'm doing 92800, and then press return.
Kilohertz entry.
It's a kilohertz only entry system. In the next version of SDRuno, I could do the same operation and I could type 92.8 M, and it will allow you to specify megahertz. Again, that's another common problem that people have, is that they. So if a lot of people would type 92.8, press return, and then they say, okay, well, why am I not seeing 92.8 megahertz? In fact, what they've actually specified there is 92.8 kilohertz. And so it's 92800,
so that's,
return.
and now that's
And the frequency isn't locked in until I press return and the box turns back to white. If the box is still green, it means that you're still in frequency input mode, and that won't be reflected in the software.
You've just put in the tuning VFO frequency, haven't you? Or was,
oh, well, I wasn't played. Yeah.
How do you enter the LO frequency directly?
Well, when you start SDRuno, they are the same.
Okay.
So,
but so then you tune off to a frequency you want. How do you make sure you've got this offset? Like
well,
HDSDR,
unless you can click back on it, you can realign them back up again.
But and to keep them apart.
But if you keep so if once I click away, so once I click over here, I've now introduced 100 kilohertz offset, and that offset will be maintained. However, when I restart SDRuno, it will align them again. And again, the relationship between the LO frequency and the VFO frequency, that again is something that we're going to address in a future release. We're going to break that link and allow you to control them separately.
So basically, that's how you do it now. It is you've just got to think about it. It's a little bit cumbersome, and it will have more options in the future.
Yeah, I mean we've had SDRuno about 18 months maybe, and the first few releases were to integrate the RSP control. And let me just disable that because we're going to start buffering again otherwise. And now we've got the integration of the RSP controls pretty well. We're now starting to get into some of the usability issues that people are having, and we're going to start adding more features, make it more intuitive, easier to use.
I expect you mostly know, but there is an SDRuno Facebook group as well as the SDRplay Uno group on the Facebook groups, which often there are people there who have some good ideas, and workarounds, and suggestions, and can help. Right. So any more questions? We originally said let's do an hour and see how useful that is. So we've got a few more minutes if anyone wants to type in any other questions. Meanwhile, Andy, is there anything else?
I guess what I would say is that if anybody is struggling, our website has a full array of documentation, links to videos. John's blog's always got useful information on what's going on and how to get useful information. And there's the support link if anybody's struggling. On the contact page,
on our contact page, there's a link which really does get answered. I mean, typically well within 24 hours. It depends a little bit on the time of day. We've got a couple of support people in the US. We're mostly European time zone based, but always happy to help you out. So don't struggle on alone.
Yeah, we won't. We don't like to see anybody struggling or And also there's the Facebook groups, the SDRplay one. There's one specifically for SDRuno. All of these you can find on our website.
I've just got some very nice new technical measurements of the RSP2 thanks to the ARRL, the Amateur Radio Relay League, the US Amateur Radio Organization, in their October QST magazine have published some very detailed performance measurements, which goes a lot further than even stuff that we've been able to measure ourselves. So, and the results are pretty good, but they've kindly allowed us to publish that information, publish their article on our website. So if you go to the blog, you can download and see those measurements. So,
and we've also got the community forum.
Yes, yeah, the community,
which is a good resource for anybody having a problem. You can search it if you've got a particular issue or post a question, and it's a community support page. We try to go through there and see if there's anything we can help with, but it's more of a community support.
So often people will post questions which we don't necessarily go in and answer from SDRplay. That's for the community. So if you need an answer from us, it's always best to go direct to the contact page if you need help. But as Ismo's just echoed, those other groups are very, very active.
Well, I mean, the SDRplay one's got over 6,000 members, and I haven't seen a question that people have posted that hasn't been able to be answered. So,
and then for those of you who like SDR Console or HDSDR, they also have Facebook groups. Certainly in the case of SDR Console, the author Simon Brown is pretty active with his own groups, and we'll answer questions directly if you have any questions there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Anything we haven't covered?
There's a little bit of a delay in that.
Yeah, I mean, there is the thing with these applications is there's a lot of stuff. The audio, the SP2 window. You can do things like you can drag the filter edges in or out if you want to change the filter cutoffs. There's just so much in SDRuno. That's why Mike has done a lot of good videos. He's up to about 20 something now, and he covers everything from just the basics of getting started with Uno through to how to connect up to do digital decoding, how to connect up to your transceiver, to do as a pan adapter. I mean, he's done a lot of videos. So
and it's been great fun working with you guys. I really enjoyed my visit to Tampere, and coming back to Finland after a gap of several years was really, really good fun. So thanks to all of you, and thank you, Andy.
Yeah,
and
thanks, John.
We're certainly quite impressed with this setup. The latency is a bit.
I think we need to do some tweaking and improve.